I am glad to be with you. Thankful for the opportunity. Thankful for Levi asking and putting me on the list of those who are invited to come and to speak. It's good to see this group of folks. It's good to see that there are many of you that I don't know. There are many that I haven't met before or that I'm meeting for the first time, because that means that over the course of the 16 years that I've been at Hat, this church has grown and changed and added new folks, and that's a wonderful thing to see. It is good to see David doing a good work here. We love and appreciate he and his family. Know that this Redeemer who would be among us as a son. And here we find him at the last place that anyone could have imagined, including apparently the angels in heaven. 1 Peter 1, 10 through 12. Concerning this salvation, the prophets who prophesied about the grace that was to be yours searched and inquired carefully, inquiring what person or time the Spirit of Christ in them was indicating when he predicted the suffering of Christ and the subsequent glories. It was revealed to them that they were serving not themselves but you, and the things that have been now announced to you through those who preach the good news to you by the Holy Spirit sent from heaven, things into which angels long to look. We are able to look back at the cross and see an event that from mankind's beginning was predicted, was foretold, an event about which the entire world is focused. There is before Christ and there is after Christ. It is the pinnacle, it is the hub of human existence. Jesus was born of a virgin. He traveled for 3 years as a preacher without a place to lay his head. He performed miracles. He healed people. He raised people from the dead. He had friendships, close friendships. He formed relationships that were dear to him as a brother, closer than his physical family. He loved, he wept, he cared deeply for those that were around him. But he also met opposition. He had difficulties. He had those who came to him who he sorrowed after because they wanted to know more about him, but they weren't willing to do what he said. He would eat the Last Supper with his disciples. He would pray in the garden. He was betrayed. He was denied. He would save the robber on the cross. He would entrust his mother to John. He would call upon the Father not to forsake him. And that tells us a little bit about this man who is to be crucified. Where he was thinking, where where his focus was. As he is in the garden, he is bowed down in prayer, and there's a medical term for it, but sweat drops as blood flowed from his pores. He was so committed to it that he was breaking capillaries under his skin, and because he was sweating, the sweat would pull the blood to the surface. And he probably didn't bleed out from that because it wasn't as much blood, but also because the night would have been cooler, and it would have slowed some of that blood flow. He's betrayed by a kiss in the garden. He goes to trial. He's at the point of being released, it seems almost 3 different times, but he's not. They release Barabbas instead. They take an 18-inch stick with a 9-foot leather cord that has bits of bone wrapped into it with weight on the end. And they scourge him so that they open up wounds. One single lash, 9 different wounds. The bone going into the wound and pulling the muscle out. That's how it worked. He endures the scourging, and then he's taken to the cross. And he's a bloody mess. He has a crown of thorns on his head, and its wounds to the head bleed a lot more. And so blood is just covering his face and his neck and his hair and his body. And they put the cross on his shoulders and tell him, you've got to carry it to Golgotha. And they weren't nice about it, I'm pretty sure. So his back, from his neck to his ankles, is full of those wounds, exposed muscle. And they put a wooden, rough cross on his back and tell him he's got to carry it. And he can't do it. Not because he's weak, not because he's built like me, but because he can't. Matthew chapter 27, verse 32. As they went out, they found a man of Cyrene, Simon by name. They compelled this man to carry his cross. And when they came to the place called Golgotha, which is the place of the skull, they offered him wine to drink mixed with gall, but when he tasted it, he would not drink it. When they had crucified him, that's all we get in Matthew. And when they crucified him. What he means by that is that they laid the cross on the ground, they put Christ outstretched upon it, and they put a spike through his wrist right about there. Now that would hurt, right? Have you ever had carpal tunnel? Have you ever hit your elbow really bad and it shot a pain? We call it, you hit your funny bone. You know, that feeling? I don't know very many people that go around hitting their elbow on things to get that feeling all the time because it's so fun. When they nailed through here, they were pretty well versed in what they were doing, and they were doing it to create a lot of pain. And so they would try to hit the nerve that's right there. So that with every breath, every movement, every moment, that pain radiated. When they did the feet, Mary Carol's dealing with plantar fasciitis right now. If you've ever had that, it's really painful. Not fun. And that's just that nerve being irritated. They would try to go through that nerve as they nailed his feet to the cross. And then they would lift him up and set him in place so that he could not, he could breathe in, he just couldn't breathe back out. He would get trapped. And he would suffocate eventually. And that's where we find him. Nailed to the cross. But we're not the only ones that find him there. In fact, when we look at the text, when we see what the text exposes for us, we find different categories of people there. And so, at verse 35, when they crucified him, they divided his garments among them by casting lots. Then they sat down and kept watch over him there, and over his head they put a charge against him, which read, "This is Jesus, the King of the Jews." Then 2 robbers were crucified with him, one on the right and one on the left. We find verse 39, those who passed by derided him, wagging their heads and saying, "You who would destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days, save yourself. If you are the Son of God, come down from the cross." There were those who were passing by who found Jesus on the cross. And their response was, "Well, I've heard about you. I kind of know who you are. I know some of the claims that you've made. I know the situation. Come down. Save yourself." But if they're passerbys, if Matthew's account is accurate, which I believe it is, what it means is that they are just passing through. The message of Christ, seeing that individual who generally people understood to have been innocent on the cross, suffering in such a horrific way, wasn't a big enough deal to get them to stop and really examine what's going on. I got work to do. I got emails to answer. I've got texts to exchange. I've got stuff that's really important in my life. If you're going to do something, do it and get it over with so I can see it. And if not, let's just move on. My life is busy. And this is just kind of getting in the way. They were part of a group. They were associated with people who believed like them. It seems that these passerbys, because they knew who Jesus was, had to have been religious people. They were Jews. They were probably decent Jews. They were probably pretty good Jewish people going about their daily business. And here is one who the Jewish people had sent to the Romans to crucify. And therefore, if that's what they decided, it's probably the right thing. And so if you're going to come down, do it now because I've got stuff to do. And that's how the passerbys viewed Jesus. You ever talk to somebody about our Lord, His death, burial, and resurrection, which is the gospel? I don't have time for that right now. Could you come back another day? You know, that really sounds interesting, but right now I've got kids and I've got a job, and you know, when I retire, maybe I'll look at that. These are religious people. They would say, "I believe in Jesus." They would say, "I believe in God," not in Jesus, but I believe in God. I believe He is my God. He is Jehovah God. But this Jesus, that kind of stuff, what He's preaching, what He's teaching, maybe it's good for Him, but it's not good for me. Look at where it got Him. If it requires that much commitment, if it requires that much suffering, if it requires that much of me, I'm not interested. And so I'm going to move on. In verse 45, we see a second group of folks. They're the bystanders. Now from the 6th hour there was darkness over all the land until the 9th hour. And about the 9th hour Jesus cried out with a loud voice, saying, "Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani," which is, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And some of the bystanders, hearing it, said, "This man is calling Elijah." And one of them at once ran and took a sponge, filled it with sour wine, put it on a reed, and gave it to him to drink. So now you've gone from the people who are just passing by to the people who have kind of sat down around the cross, stood up and are watching, taking in what's going on. They have forsaken their daily life to watch the spectacle. And in that group, there is one person who has compassion. Again, these are religious people. They know who Elijah is. They hear what Jesus is saying, and they interpret that to mean that he's calling for Elijah, a prophet of the Jewish people. One of these individuals has compassion and tries to assist the Lord, tries to relieve some of his suffering. And the crowd that he's with says, "Don't do that. Wait. You don't get involved. It's okay for you to feel that way, but just don't do anything about it." And he doesn't. His compassion is overcome by peer pressure. I've been there. There's an outcast person. There's somebody who's dirty, who is unclean, who doesn't use the same language as me, doesn't look the same way I do, is not part of my crew, not part of my life, not part of my group. And even when I feel compassion for them, what's it going to cost me if I help them? What's it going to cost me if I bring them into my group? Well, it's not easy. It doesn't get any easier once we're out of our teenage years. We preach that a lot to teenagers, right? It's not any easier as an adult. In verse 49, we see yet another group. At this point, the darkness has fallen over the land. Verse 49, but others said, "Wait, let us see whether Elijah will come to save him." And Jesus cried out with a loud voice and yielded up his spirit. We're comfortable here. We like watching the event, but we don't really want to be a part of it. I want to find Jesus. I just don't want to have to live like he lived. I want to find Jesus. I just don't want to have to suffer the way he suffered. I want to find Jesus. I just don't want to have to commit the way that he committed to me. Wait. Let's see what happens. Don't get involved. Don't do anything. Let's just see what occurs next. Maybe they were motivated by fear. But I think that they were fulfilling what Psalm 22 tells us. And we're going to read a lot of verses there because as we get a picture of these individuals very clearly. So Psalm 22, beginning in verse 1. My God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from saving me from my words of groaning? Oh my God, I cry by day and you do not answer, and by night and I find no rest. Yet you are holy, enthroned on the praises of Israel. In you our fathers trusted. They trusted and you delivered them. To you they cried and were rescued. In you they trusted and were not put to shame. But I am a worm and not a man, scorned by mankind and despised by the people. All who see me mock me. They make mouths at me. They wag their heads. He trusts in the Lord. Let him deliver him. Let him rescue him up. For he delights in him. Yet you are he who took me from the womb. You made me trust you at my mother's breast. On you was I cast from my birth, and from my mother's womb you have been my God. Be not far from me, for trouble is near, and there is none to help. Many bulls encompass me, strong bulls of Bashan surround me. They open wide their mouths at me like ravening and roaring lions. I am poured out like water, and all my bones are out of joint. My heart is like wax, it is melted within my breast. My strength is dried up like a potsherd, and my tongue sticks to my jaws. You lay me in the dust of death, for dogs encompass me. A company of evildoers encircles me. They have pierced my hands and feet. I count all my bones. They stare and gloat over me. They divide my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots. But you, O Lord, do not be far off. O you, my help, come quickly and to my aid. Deliver my soul from my sword, from the sword, my precious life from the power of the dog. Save me from the mouths of the lion. You had the bypassers, those who were passing by. You had those who were standing watch. And both groups seemed to be fairly religious. And then you have two robbers. The two robbers on the cross on either side of Jesus. And all Matthew records in verse 44, and the robbers who were crucified with him also reviled him in the same way. You know what? I can understand their reviling him more than the others because they were in the same pain he was in. Other than the scourging, they were enduring the nails through their wrists and through their feet. They were suffocating to death as well. And in the midst of pain and suffering, where do you go? My experience tells me that we either go one of two places. That there's two options laid out before us in suffering. We draw closer to God or we push Him away. These two guys started by pushing Him away. And I think many of us, when we're honest with ourselves and we experience true, real suffering, have a moment where we begin to do the same thing. Why me, God? How could God let this happen to me? Was I not faithful enough? Was I not doing things right? What went wrong? How could this happen to me? They had even more reason, I guess, to think of that and look at Jesus, because for Jesus, Barabbas was released, and Barabbas was the ringleader of the robbers, and these two guys probably served under him, probably subordinate to him, and now he's free, and they're nailed to crosses. I hate you. I hate you for that. You could go down. You could come down. If you were who you say, you could. Everybody hates you. All these people hate you. I hate you too because I'm hurting. We know, however, that one of those robbers on the cross repents. He changes his mind. He sees Jesus. Maybe it's the darkness. Maybe it's the things that Jesus was saying, the way that Jesus was acting. We don't know exactly, but we know he changes his mind, and he changes his heart, and he changes his soul's destiny. He gets over his anger, and he realizes there's something greater. And he draws close to Jesus. And that very day, that robber went to be with him in paradise. The other never changed. And that very day, he went to burn in hellfire for the rest of eternity. When you find Jesus on the cross, especially when you're hurting, you've got a choice of what you're going to do with him. You can either push him away and say, I don't want to hurt anymore, and I will do whatever it takes to feel a little bit of relief, and I'm going to push you away. Or you can say, if it takes me suffering even more to be close to you, I want to be with you. C.S. Lewis said it this way: we shall draw nearer to God, not by trying to avoid the sufferings inherent in all loves, but by accepting them and offering them to Him, throwing away all defensive armor. If our hearts need to be broken, if He chooses this as the way in which they should break, so be it. Doesn't seem like these thieves were very religious. It doesn't seem like they had much of a religious background. But the next group did. The chief priests, scribes, and elders of the people, verse 41. So also the chief priests and the scribes and elders mocked him, saying, "He saved others, but cannot save himself. He is the King of Israel. Let him come down now from the cross, and we will believe him." See if this sounds familiar. He trusts in God. Let God deliver him now if he desires him. For he said, "I am the Son of God." They are in mocking Christ, reciting part of Psalm 22. A psalm that predicted that the Messiah who was coming would be nailed through his hands and feet. And they recognize that, and they see Jesus. They find him on the cross, and their response is to mock and make fun of it. And these folks are your religious leaders among the Jews. They knew that he had saved others. They stated it as fact. They had seen it. They were aware of it. In fact, the thing that made them want to kill Jesus more was the resurrection of Lazarus. And they knew it. They had seen him. So why didn't they just accept Jesus? Because they, like Demas, loved this present world more than Christ. Second Timothy 4 and verse 10. Their promise was, if you would only fill in the blanks, then I would believe. They had great confidence in their religiosity. They had great confidence in their tradition. They had great confidence in the things that they had done to draw closer to God. And they looked at Jesus as a threat to all of those things. They saw Jesus not as a deliverer, but one who would steal from them the luxury that they enjoyed in this world because they loved being leaders in the Jewish community. They loved the praises of men. They loved the worship of their fathers, their tradition. They loved things the way that they were. And they were unwilling to change. They saw the evidence. They saw Christ on the cross. They found him there. But they made a decision to reject him because they loved the world more. How many have we seen who turn their backs on the bleeding body of Christ on the cross because they loved drugs more, because they loved their friends more, because they loved their relatives more, because they loved that other woman, that other man more. If we let anything keep us from truly finding Christ on the cross, we're making a mockery of him. And that's what they were doing. Thankfully, though, the story doesn't end there. In verse 51, we read, "And behold, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom, and the earth shook, and the rocks were split. The tombs also were opened, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. And coming out of the tombs after his resurrection, they went into the holy city and appeared to many. When the centurion and those who were with him keeping watch over Jesus, saw the earthquake and what took place. They were filled with awe and said, "Truly, this was the Son of God." Here's another non-religious person for you. The Roman centurion. So what made the difference? What caused him to say, "Surely this was the Son of God"? Because he didn't see anything different than all of the rest of these groups. So what changed? I believe the centurion didn't have the lens through which the Jewish people were having to look. He didn't think that he could be righteous in the old ways. He didn't think that he could be righteous in himself. He didn't think that he could, by doing enough or saying the right things or being born into the right family, be acceptable to God. All he knew was, here's a guy who was innocent and scourged by my soldiers at my command, nailed to this cross, and all he cared about were other people. And as he's gasping for breath, his words are, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they're doing." And when he died, a 4-inch thick, according to some scholars, maybe thicker, maybe a little less, piece of cloth is split in two. And tombs are opened up, and dead people begin to walk. And he looks around him and he says, if all of that's going on because he died, he's the Son of God. Amen. He saw the evidence, he weighed the evidence, and he made a logical conclusion. The conclusion was he was struck with awe. This is fantastic. This is amazing. As he is looking up at a dead body bleeding all over the place with a big hole in the side. Because if I were there, I'm sure to my shame, I would be struck by how brutal. I would be struck by how ashamed I was to have even been part of that. I would have been struck with fear. That was the Son of God that I just crucified. What am I going to do? How am I going to get out of this? How do I clean my hands? He looked up and said, "Wow. Amazing." We don't know how it changed his life. We don't know what that realization came to be for him, but I choose to believe that with that type of revelation in his life, with finding Jesus on the cross and truly finding him as the Son of God on the cross, it changed everything. Jordan Peterson is a name you may or may not know. He is from Canada. He is a clinical psychologist. He studies psychology. He studies the brain, actions, motivations, things like that. For all of his adult life until very recently was an atheist. He believed in a moral code, and he sought throughout his entire adult life to teach and create a moral code without God. And recently he has been on a journey to the Almighty. I want to read you a quote from Jordan and see if we can find ourselves digging deeper. he's talking about the idea that some people criticize Christianity because there are, using their terms, there are other myths that have a death and resurrection story. So he's answering that criticism. Here's what he says. The difference, and C.S. Lewis pointed this out well, between those mythological gods and Christ was that there's a historical representation of his existence as well. He said, you can debate whether or not that is genuine, but there's a sense in which it doesn't matter because there's still a historical story. So what you have in the figure of Christ is an actual person who actually lived plus a myth. And in some sense, Christ is the union of those two things. The problem is, at this point in the video, he begins to cry. The problem is, I probably believe that. But I'm amazed at my own belief, and I don't understand it. In some sense, it is undeniable, he added, because I've seen the objective world, this stuff, the objective world, and the narrative world. I love you. Well, you're talking about something that is part of a narrative. You can't touch it. It's not part of the objective world. I've seen the objective world and the narrative world touch. That's union synchronicity. And that means the simultaneous occurrence of events which appear significantly related but have no discernible causal connection. I've seen that many times in my own life, and so in some sense, I believe it's undeniable. Peterson explained how his narrative sense of the world had been the world of morality. Again, he'd been teaching how to be moral without God. The world that tells us how to act. We treat it like it's real, he said. It's not the objective world, but the narrative and the objective world touch. And the ultimate example of that, this thing that we can touch, and the concept of love or morality is Christ. He is where those two worlds come together in one person. But that's not where he stops. That seems only plausible, Peterson went on, again, becoming emotional. But I still don't know what to make of it. So here's a man who's realizing, I'm amazed that I believe in Jesus. You think the centurion was feeling some of that? But I don't know what to do with that. And here's why he doesn't know what to do with it. It's not because he can't read the Bible and tell what he needs to do. Here's why he doesn't know what to do with the fact that Jesus is real. Partly because it's too terrifying a reality to fully believe. I don't know what would happen to you if you fully believed it. Because if you fully believe it, it's going to change you. If you fully believe it, you've got to die. If you fully believe it, you've got to wash everything away. If you fully believe it, you're going to be something new. And that's terrifying. For Jordan, for me, and maybe for you. Because it means I can't live like all the people around me. I can't just acknowledge Jesus on the cross and then keep on walking. I can't just acknowledge Jesus on the cross and stand there and watch the show. I can't just acknowledge Jesus on the cross and say, but I'm going to stay with my traditions. I'm going to stay with what makes me feel comfortable. I'm going to stay with what I was raised with. I'm going to stay in place. No. If I find Jesus on the cross as the Messiah, I've got to go through what he went through. I've got to share in his suffering, his death, his burial, and his resurrection. And I've got to continue in that life the rest of my days. So this evening, do you find Jesus on the cross as a poor soul bleeding and dying, with whom you just walk on past? Or do you find him as the Messiah, the promised one of God, and believe to the point that you allow it to make a change in who you are? Repenting of sins, confessing his name, with the same confession that the centurion would make. Surely this is the Son of God. And then going through what he went through. Dying to yourself, being buried in water to rise in newness of life. We call it baptism, but really it's sharing in the suffering of Jesus. Maybe you've done those things, but you feel your anger, and you're afraid. You're more like the thieves on the cross, and you're pushing Jesus away. Maybe you're feeling those time constraints, and you recognize he's preached a really long time. And so I just need to go about my business. I don't have time for Jesus tonight. Maybe it is that you've just become comfortable in your tradition. Yeah, we can say that within the church. And it would be just as wrong for us as it would be anyone else. If our faith isn't about Jesus, it's about the building, the people, the traditions. All right. Tonight you have the opportunity to find Jesus on the cross. We'll sing an invitation song to help encourage you, but if you need to do so, or if you need to be restored, we're here for you. We want to help in any way we can. Let us know by coming forward as we stand, as we sing.